Yeah, Shemu Nsegiamba is out front. He will presumably take to the hot seat as the first rider off on the ramp this morning. This afternoon. We're in the afternoon, aren't we?
Yeah.
Let me just check my time of day. Yeah, so of course he was the starter for our elite men's time trial, and yeah, the timing 0.1, so the first split, the gap was 1:45. So he's going to look to ride into that hot seat, and yeah, it will be a really big moment for this rider, and he's still at the head of that
Trialing bike, but maybe like a spinnaker. He's going to indeed catch the wind and head through. The breeze is just starting to pick up ever so slightly, and it might well be slightly impactful as we get deeper into the day. But for now, those who are opening the course have got a free run, a free hand. I'm hoping that our benchmark times, the timing 0.1, has indeed been breached by this man, and he's quickest so far. And I've got to tell you, of the 7 riders who come through, by a handsome margin, a minute and 45 quicker than the nearest rider to him. So listen, Guillaume, they've put some very, very good riders, Rwanda, out first just to give us a proper benchmark and get a look at them on the hot seat. I reckon he's going well.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen this, haven't we, early on in the women's elite race and indeed the men's, with Nsegiamba just putting in a really solid ride here. And so he's obviously just gone past the second checkpoint, so the only rider to have gone through the first 2. But as you say, the time gap's significant, as we saw him at timing 0.1. So we're seeing riders scale the Côte de Nyanza today, then descend, do a dead turn and come back up again on the other side with, of course, a different gradient and a different approach to that summit. So there is a lot of climbing to contend with today, and it's perhaps had even more of an impact than we first thought. And there's a lot of riders looking at that 681 metres of climbing, and of course having to consider exactly how they pace that coming into those time splits. And I think the narrative enhances throughout the day, of course, with more and more riders setting off on that start ramp, as to how individual riders are planning their race, because we can't always tell, of course, can we, in the early checkpoints.
One can only guess what the issues are, but there's a bit of sadness about that. I always think if indeed you don't get to actually start for something that you must have been building up for an awful long time, there has to be a very good reason.
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? And with a time trial, we sadly have seen that, where people are in big anticipation. So many elements to consider, going back to my point on what we see in the latter part of today's time trial course. Of course, 40.6 kilometres. And as we approach the end of that, we have the section of cobbles, and then once they're off that surface, there's more climbing towards the end, of course. And I wonder how much elements like tyre pressure have come into the conversations, because although it's late in the day, you do not want to fall at that hurdle by having any sort of technical difficulties on that run-in.
So our friend from Sierra Leone, it could be something just as simple as having missed your slot, and you're not allowed to indeed go beyond that. I believe he is the only rider from Sierra Leone as well, so it can actually just be nothing more than just having not had your eyes on the clock, as simple as that. It's brutal in that regard, isn't it? You're not allowed to enter the course if you're not on time.
Yeah, there's so many elements like that, isn't there, across our sport, and all the rules in terms of track cycling. We see it a lot in terms of whether you're allowed
Say that may well indeed be our early benchmark. However, having said that, Rwanda and their own riders have been brilliant. And when they give us their national champions, we have been sitting up and appreciating what they are delivering. The man from Madagascar here, Mohamed Fatih Hian Toa, is off and underway. I tell you what, I like this bike. It's not the most dialed-in time trial machine. We've talked about the different kits, but it's kind of quite sinuous and lovely, old school, like me.
And I think that's what we're seeing a display of here with this rider. Is just look at the focus, the dedication, everything that he's putting into this ride, despite being on that start ramp, knowing that you're going to have the likes of Remco and Tadej later, who have got absolutely everything on their side, everything dialed in. But this rider is just putting everything in to getting the most he can out of himself, out of his equipment. And we're seeing a lot of that on display today.
I must admit, my heart goes out to him. Different funding levels, of course, for different federations. Of all the sports, however, I've got to say that cycling is, in terms of its equipment, it's quite open, I must admit, to all. The variation between, let's just take motorsport for a moment, shall we? A regular car and indeed a Formula One car is an eternal difference between them. From the very best, from the very best of the shop-bought bikes to the pro bikes, there isn't that kind of void. And so it is somebody that perhaps we're a little more familiar with, at least out of these early riders, and somebody who can go very well, taking advantage of the quota, fielding 3 riders actually, courtesy of having won it. You're allowed to have the champion plus 2. So Florian Vermeersch is here. How will he go?
Well, I would say that we're expecting a solid ride, and it's something that you've nodded to. Of course, we would expect as we go up this start list, as we get closer and closer to the conclusion of today, we're going to see more and more exciting rides come out of the bag. But something I wanted to go back to is Nsengi here and the display that we've seen in terms of the start order, and that they have really put on show their best talent from Rwanda here today. And we've had a real good opportunity to have eyes on the first 2 riders in the women's and the men's to start, to go, have the availability to go into that hot seat. But they've put in really, really good rides today, those 2 riders from Rwanda.
The Volcanoes National Park, and there was a gorilla. The gorilla looked like it got a microphone. Maybe it's just the way I'm looking at the statue, but beautiful. The natural parks here there's so many natural it is a tough ask, I think it's fair to say, with over 600 meters of altitude gain compressed into this short time trial by some standards, but long by others. And in fact, if we talk about altitude gain, this course is the most peaky that we've had since 2001 in Lisbon. Can you believe that?
I can believe it. I can believe it, having seen everything at play earlier on today in the women's elite time trial. I think it's also notable, obviously, the structure of a course, the layout of it is not just looking at the pure elevation gain, as you know. It's the positioning of it in terms of pacing that effort. And I think a lot of riders have arrived here and had a good recon, a good look at exactly what lies ahead. And the severity of the latter part of this course, I think, has perhaps been bigger than people anticipated. But it's given us so much to talk about, and not only in the pacing and the form of the riders and their preparations for that, and potentially how much a rider has been able to train at altitude compared with riders that haven't. It's also the tech as well, in terms of a rider's time trial position. How long are they able to stay in that position on a course like this? We've seen a lot of the best riders being forced out of position with how much these gradients are biting when they're reaching the heights of around 11%. And you've also got to navigate cobbles. Is it a gain to stay in the skis, to stay in that position, or are you better off trying to power over them out of those bars? So it'll be really telling to see when we get the smaller time gaps coming through a little bit later as to how riders are approaching it. But we've talked a lot about the elevation gain, but of course on the other...
Absolutely amazing. There is Kenyan white tea as well, but to be honest, the black tea is a heady brew. Gives you a boost. You tell I need one. Anyway, here is our friend, and to be honest, the second and third checkpoints are separated by not a mighty distance, but just to give you an example of how far ahead of the field that Nissen Gyumva is, He's been through the third checkpoint, and only 2 riders have been